Coming up, New York Football Giants camp vibes as we take a look at not only the veterans, including newcomer Darren Waller, but some of the standout performances from the young core, rookies, and maybe even a hidden gem in the sixth round with Tre Hawkins. We dive in on the takeaways so far this summer, coming up next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where I am your host, Adam Armbrecht, obviously covering the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast with Doug Norrie, and your New Jersey Devils and the Devils Puck Luck podcast with Danny McDonough. Flying solo for today on a Monday. Andy's going to be back in all throughout this week as we break down big takeaways from the New York Football Giants camp. And, Daniel Jones, and watching some of his throws and seeing some nice deep ball connections, great out routes. A lot of times I think about camp, especially when it comes to a quarterback who now is in his second year in this system. It's all about fundamental reps, right? We know they're blowing dead the sacks as Wink Martindale on the defensive side is starting to get their legs underneath them a little bit. I think it's really, to me, about timing, about finding rhythm, and for some new players, about finding out when and where you want those route combinations to break. Chief among those new guys is tight end Darren Waller, who we know is more than just being labeled as a tight end. You have to look at him and really get excited about what he could mean for Daniel Jones here. This is a dynamic playmaker out of the tight end position. We understand that throughout camp so far, as he's going to get a day off as well, just catching everything being thrown his way. We're seeing that 6'6" vertical really come into play here, able to rise up. And frankly, it's the little things that you love about it, because you can think about a Travis Kelce. These aren't the same mold of player, but it can't just be enough that you're bigger than a lot of guys and you can go ahead and you'll get high point the ball. It's also about route running. It's also about putting yourself in between the quarterback and the defender, and then using that big 6'6" frame to really wall off the defense and give your quarterback a bit of a security blanket. We know, going back, when we think about obviously Darren Waller, and the biggest concern we're going to say we have for him coming into this year is just health. Stay healthy, be on the field, be available. Going back to 2021, just 11 games, just 9 the past season with the Raiders. So 20 games over the last 2 years. But again, even in going back to 2021 with 11 games, 665 yards, had just a couple of touchdowns. We're looking for that 2020 kind of form, where we know 107 receptions on 145 targets, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns. And by the way, he doesn't need to get all the way there on those numbers, but just the fact that he's already showing off in camp how valuable of an asset he's going to be. And frankly, think about the other guy in the tight end room that we're really fond of, Andy's favorite boy from last year's draft class in Bellinger, right? You want to be able to create these opportunities for Bellinger, who looks like he has bulked up something fierce, to not only be the both and, right, helping out in the blocking, obviously, with the offensive line, but then just kind of, being the forgotten piece here, right? Running some of those little bleed out routes off the line of scrimmage, short up and unders, and making Daniel Jones have a safety valve. Because while Darren Waller, we think about him being this dynamic playmaker, and obviously he's always going to be the guy that you can look to. You want him stretching the field. You want him pulling defenses away. You want him making life easier for Saquon Barkley or any running back in the backfield when Barkley needs a spell, right? And for Daniel Jones, by the way, with his legs too. So I think so much about what the Giants accomplished in bringing in Darren Waller, and then these other receivers we're going to talk about too, is just giving Daniel Jones the space, giving this offense the space where defenses are going to have to really try to hone in, figure out who they want to focus in on, and understand that ultimately they're always going to butt up against some type of problem, right? There's always going to be a potential problem here in terms of picking your poison about who you want to defend against. I'll flip it over to the other side here. Defensively, one of the other questions that we were curious about, another guy that we're high on in terms of a second-year player, and that's Dane Belton. We know that he dealt with some of his own injuries last year as well. As it stands right now, Jason Pinnock just seems to be coming in and claiming that role alongside Xavier McKinney in the secondary. Not a bad thing. Now, again, if you asked us, and we know, Dane Belton is someone that we're excited about, and he's still going to be versatile. So this isn't diminishing anyone's role in that secondary, but having a veteran is important. Is Xavier McKinney a veteran at this point of his career? Of course he is. But Jason Pinnock came in last season and really just claimed a role, right? Understands the system, understands what's being asked of him. And for a guy who is, oddly enough, still just 24 years old, I think we kind of forget that too. The Giants may have kind of lucked themselves into a pick here and a player that was taken back in 2021 by fellow stadium alum or roommates, Jets. 2021, right? Fifth round pick. And all of a sudden, he's come over and really shown up in camp in a nice way. Had an insane interception catch on a deep ball. One that, as everyone's kind of talked about just in terms of coverage around this, that it was a Daniel Jones throw. You don't worry about the throw. You want him to be looking for those, and then you just applaud an absolute maximum effort. People even going, shades of Odell Beckham Jr.'s catch, just big stretch, one-handed. So Penix really showed out in a nice way as well. So those are veteran guys that we've really enjoyed. Now, interestingly enough, before we even get into some of the offensive line and what we've seen here, from a rookie standpoint, it's been a developing camp here, or developing narratives. Early on in camp, a guy like Jalin Hyatt, we're talking about, okay, how is he looking? Is he struggling a little bit? Has some heat exhaustion last week. And then slowly as we go, right? Noting that he hit 24 miles per hour at one point there in camp. He's a burner. He's taking the top off of defenses. But if we think about the knock for him coming out of college was the route tree, the route combinations, right? Has a really nice catch in the end zone where it is an up and out route. So he toe taps right there inside the end zone before stepping out of bounds. You're seeing some nice sequences from him that suggest the development is there, that the chip on his shoulder, when we go back and remember that line, right? Oh, well, you know what you are, whoever scout that was for whatever team. We know what you are. You're a burner. You're a guy that stretches the field. And listen, every athlete is like this, but Jalin Hyatt took it section to I'm in everything. And it's really good to see him say, not only can I do it, but now I'm going to show you that I can do it. Still a bit of a ways to go here. Already people asking the question, how soon could we see a player like Jalin Hyatt get into potentially the starting unit for the New York Football Giants? It actually depends on another. Flip it back to a veteran. Sterling Sheppard off the PUP list, along with Jamison Crowder, by the way. So just great to see Sterling Sheppard able to be out there. We've said this all along. If he's healthy, if he can be on the field, he's one of the most dynamic weapons that potentially Daniel Jones is going to have at his disposal. We understand that at 30 years old, plus years old, it's going to be a diminishing return, as it always is for wide receivers, let alone a wide receiver that's had the injury history that Sterling Sheppard has had. But lest we forget, when we go back to last year, think about the fact that he came in. Remember, he gets injured after just 3 weeks into the season. But in those 3 weeks, take away game number 1, 2 receptions on 4 targets for 71 yards. So don't totally diminish it, because the big plays were there. And I know that the yards per catch gets smaller in week number 2, but 6 catches on 10 targets, 5 catches on 10 targets the following week for 49 yards. He looks so quick and so dynamic and shifty in and out of the top of his routes, losing and shaking defenders. If he can be healthy, if he's a guy that had 13 catches for 150 yards in 3 games last year for the New York Football Giants. Just imagine what that could look like over a 17-game season, especially with another veteran in Paris Campbell that looks 100% the part so far in camp. Again, another guy that's had a couple of injuries over the course of his career. But remember, he's a top-end talent coming out of college, and hopefully now it's an opportunity for him to be healthy and out there. And this is where we take a breath here as well for myself, but we take a big step back and think about that wide receiver room. They brought back Darius Slayton. Okay. And he's a 5th round pick and it's a 1-year deal. And the question becomes, how are you going to utilize these guys? As it stands, we think about it, all things being equal, let's keep Sheppard, at least for the minute, out of this starting rotation, right? It's Hodgins, it's Slayton, it's Paris Campbell. Now, if you start to add in, we got to wait to see what the deal is going to be with Wan'Dale Robinson. So put him to the side. If you can add in Sterling Sheppard and Jalin Hyatt with consistency. So for Sheppard, it's just health. For Jalin Hyatt, it's development. All of a sudden, man, the wave after wave of dynamic playmakers that you can put out there on the field to really complement. If you think about Hodgins absolutely excellent last year. We all know that. But a big-bodied guy, put him in the category with a Darren Waller, a big-bodied receiver. Put him in the category with a Darius Slayton, a big-bodied receiver. And then they each have varying degrees of speed and burst, Darius Slayton being top among them. Well, you have these big guys, and you can pull out any one of them that you want on a given play. and then insert some shiftier, some more dynamic, some harder to catch, some harder to get at your hands on kind of players like Paris Campbell, like Sterling Sheppard, like Jalin Hyatt. And then again, we'll leave Wan'Dale Robinson as that real question mark. Fascinatingly enough, just to remember here, Cole Beasley was brought into camp, mentioned that Jamison Crowder is off the PUP list, and then you go in behind him even a little bit. Obviously, we're talking a lot, not just about a guy like Colin Johnson, who's going to be coming back here, but then you got Ford Wheaton, who has shown up in camp here and had some nice catches. One of the things, as we'll turn ourselves back over to the defensive side of the ball, and maybe one of the concern areas, this has been something that Ford Wheaton actually maybe helped expose, right? So Deonte Banks, the first round pick for the Giants, he struggled. He's struggled against Darren Waller. He's struggled against almost every matchup he's had out there. Seems to be really having a hard time getting his hands on and jamming the receivers at the line. So you're losing that first step, and then you're losing the route battle as well. And I mentioned Ford Wheaton because you see this a lot in the discussions over, especially on Twitter, right? Boy, Deonte Banks, is this the warning bells? Are they going off? No, they're not, because you expect these early struggles for players, especially in the secondary, especially in 7-on-7 drills, especially in these 1v1 matchups, right? Like, you don't have the safety help over the top. You're still learning the system. Now, it doesn't mean you don't want to see him get better, but you're not going to, again, you want a veteran Darren Waller to get jammed up and locked up by Deonte Banks? No, you'd love to see it for Banks, but if that's happening to Waller, you probably have much larger concerns. So you give yourself a little bit of breathing room there. But then the question instantly becomes, what are you going to do in the secondary? Because as we stand right now, we know it's going to be Adoree Jackson on the one side. Who's going to be playing across from him? You want it to be Deonte Banks. You also have Cordell Flott, who's bulked up a bit. You like what he's bringing at least out there. But again, just a second-year player, a lot of development. And where do they want to utilize him? He can work out of the slot potentially. And I actually think, even though putting on that weight makes him more versatile, putting on that weight still just makes him effective in that role if you want to use him that way. Darnay Holmes, maybe the clock is ticking on his timeline here. And then obviously a guy that we wish we could see in Aaron Robinson, because we had some high hopes for him, but we just haven't had that opportunity yet. Rodarius Williams, by the way, one of Andy's favorites, has been out there in camp and certainly getting himself back healthy as well. That's where we come to Tre Hawkins III. Why? Because Tre Hawkins III was taken in the 6th round by the New York Football Giants, and seemingly with a 209th selection overall in the draft, Hawkins might be the steal of the draft potentially. And I'm not, let's be very, very clear. It's camp. So I'm not going to overhype it outside of the fact that I just said what I did. But when you look at a player like this, I think back to a guy like Tariq Woolen, who I really loved and ended up going to the Seattle Seahawks. And when he was in college, you're talking about him as a prospect, you say, well, with his size, does he have enough speed to compete at the cornerback position? Maybe he's best suited as a safety. And I said, I love him. I love him. I love him. I want the Giants to take him. And listen, you have your misses too, but when you have your hits, you're gonna go ahead and champion it when you talk about it. He really came through, right? Was one of the best rookies in the secondary in the NFL last year, and it's impressive. And that combination of size and strength is really what pays dividends for him. That's what I think we are seeing from Tre Hawkins right now, right? Comes in at 6'3". Now they listed, by the way, you go back and look at some of these things. They got him at 6'1" in some categories. I have no idea what they're talking about, because he certainly has more height than that, and he has the strength. And now it's just about, can he find a way to continue to develop throughout camp here? And the real question becomes for me, with players like this, 6'3", 195 officially listed in camp here, out of Old Dominion, so it's a smaller school. This is always what happens with smaller school guys. And by and large, they fall by the wayside in the NFL draft. You play at a small school, it's hard to extrapolate this skill set and know what they're going to be and if they're capable. Is it just that they didn't play against the best level of competition, and therefore you're not necessarily going to know if there are real warts in their game? Some of the tape can look a little bit glossier. In this instance, the Giants take a shot on him in a late round pick, and he has now gone from 3rd to 2nd to getting first team reps, exclusively first team reps on Monday out there in camp. So while you don't want to sit here and say, if Deonte Banks isn't fully ready to go, it looks like Tre Hawkins can be the guy, what you do say and what you're excited to say is, it looks like we have a player. Because you go back and look inside this depth chart, and I'm mentioning some of those other names, right? Aaron Robinson, health concerns, and we don't really know. We haven't gotten a big sample size from him. Cordell Flott, just a second-year player, continuing to develop and grow. Darnay Holmes, again, could be on the outside looking in when it's all said and done. And then you throw in some other players, obviously, like McLeod, Alex Cook, Cook being the safety room there, and Arorie. Oh, I'm going to mess that one up. I'll correct that next episode because I'm not going to pronounce it right now. I'm going to tell you that just to be clear. There is a hole here to be filled. And as excited as we are about Deonte Banks in the second year of Cordell Flott, understand the Giants need to keep bringing in more weapons and more versatile players. If a dude shows up like this, and we saw him against Jalin Hyatt, be able to play with him, turn coming out of the routes, get the hips turned around, and use his big physical presence to swat away a ball. We've seen him work deep with some of the bigger, more physical receivers. So the fact that he's showing it across the board here, that's what has to excite you about a player like Tre Hawkins right now. He's getting all the hype from the Giants fan base. So it's really exciting to see how well that he has played. Just other notable things here. I want to make sure that we hit all of them. I mentioned Paris Campbell there. He had a couple of deep balls. Remember, he is a speed receiver himself as well. So you're going to have a lot of those opportunities here. Noted by the way, I want to give credit where it's due. Bobby Skinner noted that Nick McLeod had some good physical jams on 3-on-3 and then an interception on the 11-on-11. So when we talk about in that secondary room, who are the guys that are showing up here? McLeod making maybe a little bit of noise here. Hawkins clearly making some noise here, right? So you start to elevate those guys and where you think the hierarchy is here. The closeout conversation that we have is just getting ourselves over on the offensive line, where today on Monday, and we already saw a little bit of this, Bredesen was playing at center, also played out of guard at some point. But today we got the combination going across here, which I think is obviously the one that we be dreaming on, or at least the One Giant podcast is dreaming on, which is having Andrew Thomas there, then having Azuda, then having Schmidt there in the middle. And then oddly enough, today you saw a bit of Bredesen over at guard instead of Glowinski, along with Evan Neal. So, and this is really what we've talked about, right? Glowinski is fine. You weren't expecting him to be a Pro Bowler. You wanted him to be consistent and available for you. The dream scenario for me is that it's Azudu and it's obviously Schmitz there in the middle. And then you have your two young players, obviously newly minted Andrew Thomas, second-year player, and Evan Neal, who dropped some LBs here, which I actually think really matters, because you go back to last year and you think about the college level, you can't just be a mauler all the time. Getting beat around the edge matters, right? So he comes in a little bit lighter, hopefully a little bit more nimble, so he can stay with some of those pass rushers coming off the edge when it comes into this season. Now, ultimately, I want the best combination of 5 guys on the field. So you don't have to tell me that Azudu is in the starting rotation just yet, but I would prefer it. That's just me. I think that Schmitz needs to be the starting center here. You don't take a player that high in the draft and you don't look at the roster and say that you have a clearly better option, more viable option where you want to push him aside. Don't forget there's still Lemieux. There's still McCathan in the background here. Unfortunately, McCathan with the injury, Lemieux coming off of some injury history here. So we don't know where these guys are going to shake out, but that's the way it is for me. Thomas, Azudu, Schmitz, and then you can tell me whatever it is. If Glowinski deserves that starting job at the right guard, that's fine. If Bredesen just looks better in camp and he deserves it, fine. I'd love to go ahead and find out if I think Glowinski has swing ability going from guard to guard as a depth piece. Otherwise, you sometimes do look at a guy that maybe outperforms a little bit in camp, but because of his versatility, like Bredesen, you say, well, if you can play across both guard spots and center, we want to keep you in that valuable role, so long as the gap in starting is not so dramatic, right? So it's interesting to see how far Mike Kafka, how far Brian Dable want to push some of these young players like an Azudu coming out of the third round last year and say, hey, this is your job to earn and to win. And then do they have the confidence that even if they stumble and they have to fall out of that unit and Bredesen has to come in and be the safety valve, as long as you trust that these guys can take those lumps, I think growing pains are actually really important here for the New York Football Giants and for some of these young players. I mentioned there at the end here, too, as we close out, just a quick little update here. We're going to come back on Wednesday as well. The quick update for me was just we talk about notable quotes. You have Isaiah Hodgins talking about Daniel Jones and just saying, yeah, we saw we're not worried about him in here. The development, we saw the way he played last year, and then we saw the playoff game against the Minnesota Vikings, obviously. We're all good. Everybody is confident in Daniel Jones and what he can do, and that really matters. Defensively, by the way, saw some good plays from a few different players across the defensive front. Okereke is flying all around the field, and that's exactly what you're hearing from Wink Martindale on him as well. This guy is going sideline to sideline. He's getting involved in a lot of these plays. And we mentioned it's about Darian Beavers now. Can he be the cemented pair with player there in the linebacking core? That would be such a dramatic shift. So we're hearing a lot of positive things around a lot of these key positions across the board, including hearing that one Eli Manning was at camp and getting a little bit of love from Brian Dable, who also gave love to Jalin Hyatt after he came out with a great catch too. So really just a lot of positivity right now going around camp, especially when we just think about, we'll close out on this. When you think about the fact that this is a team that needs to have primarily good vibes, right? Sterling Sheppard coming back healthy, having some guys win some position battles here, seeing steady development. You don't have to look too far over at Joe Burrow and what could have been a far scarier situation. Looks like he'll be ultimately okay, but guys come up lame in training camp and it changes everything. It changes everything in a very big way as far as what the outlook is. And right now for the Giants, they've gotten deeper. They've gotten certainly more weapons for offense, certainly more dynamic and more consistent playmakers for defense. Now it's about piecing it all together and keeping it all together. So as we are going to be approaching some of the preseason games, which give us very few sample sizes on a lot of key players, but that's where we turn our attention to these position battles, and we want to see guys really claim these spots. And that's a lot of what I got out of some of these training camps that we've seen so far. Just certain guys, young players looking like they're ready to step up and claim for some roles for themselves. So that's what we're going to continue to cover all week long here on OGP. And then we'll be kicking off our kind of going into the regular season basically schedule. Hopefully some other fun stuff to announce here along the way. But as we ramp things back up, as it stands right now, positive vibes across the board for Big Blue. I think almost, everywhere except maybe Deonte Banks right now. But again, give the young man some time to develop. You follow us at One Giant Podcast on Twitter, at Adam Armbrecht, at AndyMac214, over on YouTube, obviously, and wherever you get those podcast needs fulfilled. Until next time, were he here, he would say, as always, let's go Big Blue.